Welcome, we are here with Matthew, the co-founder of the Rising Tide Foundation, editor-in-chief of Canadian Patriot Review, host of the Great Game on Rogue News, and he authored the 4-volume Clash of the Two Americas and co-authored the Breaking Free of Anti-China Psyops, How the Cold War is Being Revived and what you can do about it. So welcome, it's a pleasure being here with you, Matthew. And I must say it was a little bit difficult because it's 3 different time zones. So you're in Canada, I'm in Japan, and João is in Portugal. But we made this happen, and it's a really pleasure and actually an honor to be with you, because me and João, we are great fans and supporters of your work. We'll see it frequently. So thank you very much for accepting this invitation.
Hey, and thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and yeah, the organizing the morning, afternoon, and evening is always a challenge, but we made it work. So let's have some fun.
Exactly. So I would like to start with this essay that you wrote called "The Roots of Modern." Let me just put it down here. "The Roots of Modern Eco-Terrorism," from M. Kappa Ultra and Unabomber to Maurice Strong and Yuval Harari. You cover a lot of different points here, and it's the linear kind of relation that you develop is quite interesting. And I would like to, because nowadays, like in the common zeitgeist, we have this idea that humanity is the enemy of the world and enemy of itself in a way. And you have this kind of like axiomatic disposition in pretty much every single ideology that is being like thrown and exported into the intellectual realm, since in that idea of manufacturing consens, like you have the unliteral have this idea, and the very pseudo intellectuals have also their representatives, and so everyone is informed and is very consensual that humanity is the problem. And you talk about Sheldon Solomon having this kind of absurdist Camus disposition of the world, there's no meaning kind of thing, like breaking the old values. Even in David Attenborough, the new documentary, when he's saying like we're like the cause of like all these kind of like extinctions for different species, the climate change. And then on the other side, we have this kind of like, we have to do something about growth population. And on the other side, we have this kind of like eagerness to do this kind of bio-digital convergence, like putting like this kind of singularity Kurzweil, like omega point kind of thing. And this is presented to us, as you pointed out, like a false dichotomy in a way, because you can either like reject humanity and like being like a John Savage, as you said, or you can be like or you can just prepare for the brave new world and do everything you can to be the alpha in this next paradigm that is being developed. So I would like if you can just like give us a broader picture of this kind of like dispositions. I think this is really, really interesting and a really valid point, because a lot of people want to understand the end game. They want to understand how this correlates and integrates in a way. Me as well, because I have an idea, but sometimes I get lost in this esoterical like perception of the technology kind of thing, as you pointed out as well. So take it away, Matthew, please. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's a wonderful way to start our conversation. I think the content embedded within the essay that you've referenced, which people can Google and find it very easily, "The Roots of Modern Eco-Terrorism," from MK Ultra and the Unabomber to Maurice Strong and Yuval Harari. That's the title that I gave this essay. It emerged partially out of a request that was made upon me to respond on a radio show hosted by Kevin Barrett. He has a 2-hour radio show every week, and the first hour was a guest who I never heard of, named David Scribina. And he was known as an eco-anarchist, anti-technologist, who was putting out a thesis in this interview with Barrett that technology was intrinsically a destructive force against humanity, and that the best thing we could do would be to declare war against technology before technology evolves to the next phase of its natural evolution and becomes self-conscious and replaces the obsolete designs of the old human species. So that was Scribina's thesis. I didn't know much about him per se, but Kevin wanted a little bit of a more optimistic juxtaposition. And so he reached out to me and he asked me if I could be the second hour of the program, which would then, which would give me the opportunity to take Scribina's theses, his remarks, and respond accordingly, because I have a bit of a reputation, as you guys have pointed out, of being a bit of a technological optimist. Now, I did what I thought was a pretty okay job, but then when I Googled Scribina a little bit more, I was surprised to find out. I began reading some of his remarks, and the first thing I noticed was that he was a professor in Europe as well as in the University of Detroit, Dearborn. Very influential. He's written dozens of books, all sort of tackling different elements of the same thesis of humankind versus must go to war with technology, or, you know, there's some other Gnostic themes he's taken up. But I was surprised to find out he is also a popularizer of the Unabomber and a pen pal who very much admires the Unabomber, Theodore Kaczynski, a gentleman who's been in maximum security prison for about 30 years now, more than 30 years, for his work in sending mail bombs to various scientists, inventors, business people around the world, mostly in America, actually, between 1976 and 1995. And he deployed something like 30 different mail bombs that exploded, that injured many, many people. Some had died. And his targets were always people who were in forestry, who were or inventors, who were pushing forth a technology that was going to increase the productive powers of society in some way. And I was surprised to find out that the Unabomber had a network of thousands of admirers, many of whom were high level in academia. Many of them were founders of human rights or environmental rights organizations, eco-anarchist organizations. And I started reading just more of both Kaczynski's writings, his philosophy of ecology, his thesis as well, that human beings must essentially do what what Scribina had said, which was go to war with technology to save humanity and save nature. And one of the points is that they believed that civilization had to be destroyed. Yeah. To do the good, we had to destroy, even that if that meant killing billions of people along the way. That was the necessary good, or a necessary evil to achieve this greater good, which is always a formula going back in the theories of every fascist, every imperialist. The idea of the ends justify the means, right? That's always something that
Machiavel, né? Machiavel.
Well, it's what some might call Machiavellian. However, I would say there's a nuance there, because I think Machiavelli was actually not such a bad guy, but that's another story.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying like the sentences from him, right? So it's badly used to this kind of utilitarian aspect kind of thing, necessary evil.
Yeah, exactly. And all of these figures, Derek Jensen, who's the founder of, like I mentioned, a major nonprofit organization that is a recruitment organization for young people in universities that works with many professors, called Deep Green Resistance, that he founded about 13 years ago. He's another disciple of the Unabomber, which professes to recruit and groom young misanthropic people out of university who are recruited in university systems, brought into a special recruitment process, and then deployed to be a warrior class of what I identify as being eco-terrorists, deploying themselves or being deployed by forces they probably don't understand, to go to war on pipeline, destroy pipelines, sabotage trains. And when you go to their website, they have a list on their action website. They even have a list of hundreds and hundreds of infrastructure sabotage operations that were done by various groups that they support, because they want to normalize this. And they, there's all sorts of books, popular books, like How to Blow Up a Pipeline, that I opened up in that article, which has been turned into a movie, a Hollywood movie. That's another recruitment tool to try to make the young eco-terrorists who want to really just organize in some place in Arizona to blow up a pipeline to save nature, to make them seem like the sexy good guys, the romantic resistance fighters against eco-colonialism. Anyway, it's really sick. But the thesis that I try to get across, number one, is that none of this is naturally arising. All of this occurs, and I mean, there's a lot of situations of food facilities. I'll stop and I'll let you ask a question, but I'll finish the thought. This one thought. There's a lot of situations of food processing facilities across America, across Europe, going up in flames, trains releasing toxic chemicals, derailing, forest fires across Canada that are likely arson in some way. We don't have all the details, but we do seem to have enough information to say that these are arson, human induced. So there's all of these anomalous cases of infrastructure going up, and when you have this type of organized force that is openly celebrating acts of eco-terrorism against infrastructure, it's a major red alarm that I think people should explore in more detail and see how this is tied to the same operatives who abide by the exact same axioms of that human beings are a parasite to be destroyed, which is shared by those very same capitalist forces at Davos, like Mark Carney and the leading bankers who manage the capitalist structures at Davos and Bilderberg, who also believe the exact same thing, that human beings are a cancer on Mother Gaia that has to be destroyed from the top, from institutional forces. So there's a parallel.
So, Matt, that level is a low level of control of operatives, as you said, of soldiers, sergeants, and officers who take over the war against that enemy, mankind, in order to reduce population, to create a more sustainable planet. That is Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. But going a little bit back to technology, you talked in your article about Norbert Wiener. Wiener has a fundamental book written in the 30s or 40s called Cybernetics.
Yeah, that's 1946, I believe.
1946, after the Second World War. And Wiener explains very candidly that technology is to rule mankind, and mankind is going to develop technology in order to install a perfect technocratic system, which will be good for everyone, even if we don't understand. And he explains this with mathematics and very, very, very interesting reasoning. So for this level, this low level of operatives, Wiener does not exist. They might have heard about him, but nothing fundamental. Wiener writes like an instruction manual for the top brass of the elite, maybe the guys who are over Davos. Okay. We now know, and you talked about it, that there is the fear that technology will be suicidal. We're creating our own devouring monster, in their terms. Are they suicidal? Are they creating technology? Or what happened was they lost control of technology, so now technology is also dangerous for them?
Yeah, a bit of both of those answers. I think that you're kind of right on both angles. Norbert Wiener also wrote another book called The Human Use of Human Beings, which is an interesting book. I suggest people who want to understand Norbert Wiener some more should read that book. The point of Wiener, who is the founding father of cybernetics, who is an extremely, as you pointed out, he's an extremely important person to read, because he's also a disciple of Lord Bertrand Russell. He studied under Russell at Cambridge. He was a young child mathematical prodigy, given a scholarship, and he was brought into Bertrand Russell's circle. And this was while Russell was finalizing his work, a piece of garbage work called the Principia Mathematica that he co-wrote with Albert North Whitehead. It was a 3-volume book, and the last volume was published in 1913 as Norbert Wiener was one of Russell's boys. And Russell had a grouping of young boys that he groomed around him, who he wanted to take on the challenge of finding a practical application to the thesis of the Principia Mathematica. And he chose that title specifically to try to do what Isaac Newton had earlier done with his Principia Mathematica, as being sort of the standard end-all gospel of science, with the sort of method of thinking that he encouraged within the Principia.
You're now connecting to Fabian society, for example.
Well, yeah, this goes even higher than that. Though Russell was a participant with many leading Fabian Society figures, like H.G. Wells and others, and he participated in many of the meetings over the years. He was also a Cambridge apostle, and the Cambridge apostles gets you a little bit closer to the center of planning and grand strategy, whereas the Fabians tend to be a little bit more on the ground action orientation, kind of like the Rhodes Scholars out of Oxford. The Fabians operating out of the London School of Economics tend to be a little bit more action within the hierarchical chain of decision making, whereas the Cambridge zone tends to be the idea zone. That's the area where you have the planning. John Maynard Keynes being another Cambridge apostle who worked very closely with the Russellites, with Russell himself. So Russell, basically, what does he try to do? He's working with David Hilbert, who puts forth a bit earlier a challenge to all mathematicians to basically shackle physics and science to a fixed mathematical formalism, with the idea that we need to create a standard of descriptive, logical, symbolic, syllogistic science. Syllogistic just meaning form of Aristotelian logic. That computers do. That's part of computer programming. You know, you create a symbol, you associate some action with the symbol, and every time the computer sees that symbol, it does the action, right? So the idea was to reduce all mathematical knowledge to a set of limited assumptions, a limited amount of rules that have to be adopted and abided by no matter what. So, and then within that framework, reduce all of physics to the slave of this fixed mathematical language. So the idea then in Russell's world was that when it is achieved, this Principia Mathematica, when this is finally done, which he believed he did do in his 3-volume work, then he said all we would need is the data, but with this limited amount of axioms, we could then we could foresee
predictive.
We could do linear extrapolations into the future and into the past to know everything like gods. We would have knowledge of all mathematical absolutes as gods to the end of the world with the heat death, which Bertrand Russell and Wiener both believed in, because they believed in a fixed amount, like a closed system of mathematical assumptions, right? And every closed system, like in math, this side of the equation has to balance with this side of the equation. It's naturally a crystallized closed system as a formula that you can prove. That doesn't mean the universe works that way, but that means our mathematical creations do work that way, which is useful as long as you're aware that the universe is more than the math. But these guys are not aware of that. So they both believe religiously that the universe is an entropic system, and because it is closed, it is entropic. And entropy simply means it's another way of saying the second law of thermodynamics, which is the law that was artificially created in the late 19th century by another Royal Society member named Clausius, which basically
translates basically by degradation is inevitable.
Degradation, heat death is inevitable, and they prove it by saying, well, look, if you put gasoline in an engine, the gas will burn, cause heat. That heat causes motion, and the motion will then suck up more heat energy, more of that fuel, which cannot be. There can't be more fuel, so it's always going to be using more fuel than it'll be consuming more fuel than the energy being created, and thus it will be moving towards a heat death. And they say, well, that's just like every system. Every system, they say, operates like that mechanical heat engine, from a biosphere to a human system to the universe itself. They impose these things onto these macro processes that they know nothing about, but it becomes easy to manipulate if you impose these limits and these constraints. So back to Norbert Wiener, one of the challenges Bertrand Russell gave to his young prodigy, and a few others, was to find a practical application to make the Principia Mathematica become useful for the governing class. Because so far there wasn't a science of a way to apply this theoretical framework. Now, along the way, in the 1930s, 31, 32, a very close friend of Albert Einstein named Kurt Gödel produces a wonderful proof called the incompleteness theorem. And Kurt Gödel, along with Einstein and Max Planck and Madame Curie, real scientists, people who are really making discoveries. You know, keep in mind, Bertrand Russell never discovers anything. He's just in an ivory tower theorizing, you know, and what you might call intellectual masturbation. That's what he's doing. He never discovers anything. But the people who have made real discoveries are all saying, no, this has to be treated. This is not the way. We're going to do so much damage to humanity if we convince people that this is the way the mind and the universe works. So Kurt Gödel does a really good job at simply demonstrating that the core assumptions of Russell are self-contradictory, because as soon as you try to create any type of descriptive system, there is always an obligation to assume that there's something unknown beyond the descriptive system of knowns that cannot be known from within the system. It requires something else, and that something else is this creative process of human insight that uses it uses deductive, it uses inductive logic. Like, humans can use these things, and that's fine. It's okay to use what computers can do. Deductive, inductive reasoning, syllogistic logic, that's fine to use as a tool. But if you limit your mind to just that, you will not be able to think qualitatively any different from what we do with a computer program. So human beings, when you're creative in a healthy, playful mindset, but also disciplined and rigorous at the same time, you're able to, as Einstein demonstrated, and Max Planck and so many others, and Kepler and every great scientist, read their writings, look at how they made their discoveries. It was an act of creative imagination that was very animated by knowledge, deep knowledge, that allowed them to make these leaps, these discontinuous leaps into discovery concepts that then had a measurable impact upon humanity when translated into new technologies that would allow people, when applied, to discover new resources, to leap over the limits to growth that had formerly been constraining our population. When we were ignorant to those discoveries, we had less power to support ourselves, right? It's just a fact. Without knowledge of electricity, if before somebody made the discovery of the nature of electricity, we had limits that were elevated, that were expanded with Benjamin Franklin's insights into the electric fluid and its application for new inventions that allowed us to then harness this power for the good, to increase the productive powers. It's a common sense thing. But the oligarchy has been working hard, and there is an oligarchy. For those watching who might be confused when I say oligarchy, there is a hereditary class with hereditary institutions which go back a really long time and that have been obsessively trying to destroy this simple elementary fact of the human condition, that we can do things like have 8 billion of us on the earth, which we are told in our corrupt education system and media and everything else, that's unnatural. That's proof that we're a cancer, because only cancer cells, we are told, grow geometrically like human population. Every other species regulates and doesn't make discoveries, doesn't grow in terms of life expectancy, quality, and quantity. They don't do that. They're good. We are bad because we do that. So all that to say, Norbert Wiener, well, there's two things. So Kurt Gödel proves that Russell and Whitehead were completely wrong. And it's embarrassing for Russell. Whitehead is a bit more sophisticated. Whitehead, by the way, Alfred North Whitehead, is also a Cambridge apostle, very, very beloved today by many eco-anarchists because of his thesis in panpsychism. It's sort of a plagiarization and a bastardization of Leibniz's monadology.
Oh, the monads, which methodology of Leibniz, you said? Yeah,
that's originally, I mean, Leibniz is the one who advanced it, as well as computer science. Like, Leibniz is an incredible... Yeah, Leibniz is an incredible scientist, poet, statesman. He's an incredible soul. And a whole show can be dedicated to him, so we won't go into Leibniz right now. But Alfred North Whitehead is more sophisticated. And Alfred North Whitehead sees Kurt Gödel's proof, and he says, okay, you're right. I renounce the thesis that I co-wrote with Russell in the Principia. And he shifts gears and does something more subtle with the new phase of his life after 1931. Bertrand Russell, however, never accepts the proof of Gödel, and in fact seeks revenge. And Gödel, unfortunately, decades later, ends up dying of starvation because he is persuaded that Bertrand Russell has launched an effort with Masonic organizations to destroy the writings and obscure the writings of Leibniz, who Kurt Gödel truly loves, Kurt Gödel is a true Leibnizian, and as is Einstein, and as is Max Planck. But he's convinced that he's being poisoned by Russell's network, and he ends up dying. He starves himself to death. Very unfortunate. But all that to say, Bertrand Russell continues his plan. It doesn't disrupt Bertrand Russell's agenda. So Norbert Wiener, during World War II, was employed in systems of I don't know if it's the Navy. I think it's the Air Force, but it might be the Navy. But he's basically working for the U.S. military in radar. And out of his research on feedback loops, the challenge was, how do you shoot down a missile or a plane from the enemy, which requires time, right? Because you need sensors that can detect the trajectory and location of the plane or the missile that could then give that information back to the person managing the gunners on the ground, that then have to put in the calculation of where the plane or the missile is going to be that they shoot at. It's a bit of a challenge. It's a big challenge. So it requires these feedback loops and increasing the concentration of information feedback, right, into a central command. And out of that otherwise useful, you can say there's some obvious uses to this fact. It's not totally bad. But he then comes up with his solution to the Bertrand Russell challenge, which after World War II, he realized that we could apply the thesis of the Principia in the form of a new science of control, of management. And that new science of management would be to treat human beings and economies and nature as systems that are mathematically descriptive systems, right? That all have moving parts like a machine, and could be treated like an analog machine. The human economy is an analog machine. A corporation or a department of NATO, it all can be treated as a one with a purpose, a design, as a machine has a design, but with parts that work together to fulfill the objectives of the machine's design. And so basically that would then allow for a more effective means of control by an elite, a scientific engineering class that would be the few in a nerve center. As he called it, cybernetics was tied to a Greek word of gubernetos, of governance. And in the idea of that word, it was closely tied to the idea of the helmsman. A boat having a helmsman requires that the hundreds of people who might be working on the boat don't need to know what the whole boat is doing. They just need to do their very specialized job of shoveling the coal into the furnace or oaring or whatever, So only the helmsman needs to know what the whole system is doing. And that helmsman becomes synonymous with the executive nerve center of any department that is reorganized under cybernetics. And there's an organization that is called the Josiah Macy Foundation. It was itself set up by a figure who was the founder of U.S. military intelligence named Marlborough Churchill, a cousin of Winston Churchill, who was an American, founder of what's called the Black Chamber. That later on,
let me just cut something. Yeah. You spoke about the premature ejaculation of all the central planners.
Yeah.
Which is, you have a small group, central committee
or whatever.
Committee.
Yeah.
And then you have a big technocratic mixed machine human system which controls the human life in order to beat entropy.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess to avoid going into too much of a tangent, because I was just gonna say ultimately the punchline there is that the Macy Foundation that sponsored the Macy Foundation conferences on cybernetics with Norbert Wiener was also co-operated by various Tavistockian psychiatrists that had also put online things like the World Health Organization, which was founded by G. Brock Kissholm, a psychiatrist from Tavistock who was obsessed with erasing the human nature and reconstructing a new type of human out of thin air. Basically, like you could reset a computer program. That's how they want to think of human beings.
which they tried with the MK Ultra program.
Exactly, and people like Gregory Bateson, who is a cyberneticist and a figure who was very involved with MK Ultra. There was a CIA Tavistock operation to essentially reset human beings using psychedelics, shock therapy, a variety of other techniques throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s. I would even say it's continuously, it was never ended. Gregory Bateson was a member of the Macy Foundation's cybernetics conferences with Wiener and many others. So was Margaret Mead, another MK Ultra operative, an anthropologist who was assigned to manage the World Federation of Mental Health, which was also managed by another Tavistockian psychiatrist named forgetting his name. Anyway, you have these different institutions that were all embedded with a cybernetics constitution, a construction after World War II. And my punchline, right, the punchline that I wanted to get across with the Macy Foundation was that was the primary foundation, along with the Rockefeller Foundation, funding the pseudoscience of eugenics as a science of population control in the 1930s and 40s. And that was even funding Nazi scientists like Ernst Rudin were receiving Macy Foundation, Josiah Macy Foundation funding for his so-called research on human sterilization of the unfit and the useless eaters. So unfortunately for them, their Nazi experiment failed to succeed at being the new fascist world order that was supposed to come online, replacing nation states during the 1940s. That didn't really work out, and that's probably a topic for a whole conversation. Why does the Wall funded eugenics Nazi war machine failed to succeed? But all that to say, the idea was to then repackage eugenics, which began looking very ugly in the minds of many people who had seen the consequences of a full embrace by a government in Germany of eugenics, fully. And people began to rightfully be horrified. And so the governing class that saw eugenics, and keep in mind Bertrand Russell, Maynard Keynes, they're all eugenicists. They're all believers in entropy. They're believers in Malthus. Malthus being the
guy growth population,
exactly, the leading philosopher of the British Empire for 200 years. They're all devout followers of this, and they were like, well, we have to still make this is the most important of all sciences. It's like the science of sciences, and it's effectively proto-transhumanism.
That's exactly.
Yeah, it's premised on this idea that that the elite are more than human because they have the moral and utilitarian power to control the flow of evolution all of a sudden. That's a big thing to say about yourself, these arrogant, egotistical shitheads. So sorry if this is family friendly. I'm sorry.
No worries. Not family friendly at all.
Okay, cool.
Can I just put it's not like a question, it's more like a concept, because I really want to stay here in this convergence about eugenics and cybernetics. So, because as we all notice, there's this type of war in the concept of human being. You've seen this kind of dialectical approach, being that biology is a burden kind of thing. So that's the trans kind of aspect and agenda, that you don't have this kind of facticity anymore. You can just conceptually develop yourself to whatever you feel like or you want to be, and that's the preliminary stage for this type of transhumanism as well. As you can see, biology, mortality, these are common enemies in a way. So that elite as well, of course, what they are missing is that aspect. Obviously, the aspect of longevity, the aspect of in a way they're the same as us. In a way they are made of flesh as well. But still, we are seeing this kind of operation going on as we are accepting not only the fact that we are enemies of ourselves and we know better, we don't know better, we are just this kind of failed species. So we're quite receptive to this idea of having probionic things and Neuralinks and all this kind of convenient shit. The Apples throw their glasses now. Everyone is like, oh my god, VR glasses kind of thing. So we're very receptive to this type of technology, and in a way we are preparing ourselves to this kind of self-imposed eugenics, like in ideological standpoint, is already disseminating when you're like not having kids, like the demographic aspect, like the abortion kind of like not even like an ethical question anymore, or you are like an anachronistic kind of person, and like an anachronistic kind of existential perception that should be eliminated, because now with the polarization you are or with us or against us in a way. So we are like self-imposing as well. So we are like, there's a thing like you should never like blame on evil what could be blamed on stupidity, and you can never blame in stupidity the things that can be blamed to the incentives, right? So the incentives are being developed precisely for us to like incarcerate ourselves and do exactly what they are expecting us to do in a way. And this kind of cybernetic and eugenics, they are really like a mix. They're the same thing. Like you see, like I'm a techno-optimist as well, but it's the same, like it's head and tails in a way. Like they go hand to hand. Even like the FEM Esfandiari, the FEM 2030, when it was like, are you a transhumanist? And like putting, like disseminating this idea that 2030 will be like an amazing year for transhumanism. And now you have the 2030 agenda, and everyone is like triggering the fact that 2030 will be like a big year in this kind of like Matrix or Brave New World kind of thing. So what do you think about this aspect of cybernetics and the eugenics, like in the camouflage kind of like aspect? It's more a concept involved in a kind of question.
It's a thick it's a good concept you just unveiled as a composition, and it's so rich. I mean, you're totally right. I mean, eugenics itself is not just one thing. First of all, is it partially sterilizing the unfit? Yeah, partially it's that. Is it partially euthanasia of the useless eaters? Yeah, it's partially that too, which includes old people, babies, anybody who's deemed to be not utilitarian. It's this idea that, you know, what is useful is
it's eco-terrorism, it's eco-anarchism, it's climate change, it's there's so many faces to the agenda.
Yeah, and the spiritual eugenics is a big thing, as you pointed out. The self-hate that makes people not want to replicate the species, because why would I want to if I've been trained, groomed to identify as a parasite or a cancer, I would be hypocritical to replicate myself. If I'm aware of the evil that I am, I would be doing more evil by bringing more baby pollution machines into the world.
Exactly.
That's just going to increase the entropy, right? Because the logic is, like, here's the thing as well as a side note, Norbert Wiener allows for anti-entropy in his system, right? He permits for its existence. I also believe, I'm a follower of the thinking of Lyndon LaRouche, the late American scientist philosopher, who opened my mind to this approach, this way of approaching problems. And LaRouche, you know, wrote since the 70s very, very deeply on the idea of anti-entropy as a fundamental force of humanity and nature as a whole in the universe. That the universe is a living, creative process that's animated by more creation than consumption. Consumption and creation go together, but which one leads, which one follows. Now, the oligarchists, the ones who believe in seeing themselves as gods that control everything, right? Including the laws of the universe that they want to try to put in a little box, the way, you know, Russell and the entropists, they're all trying to put the whole friggin' universe into a little controllable box, even if the universe is showcasing all sorts of evidence that it doesn't behave that way. They don't care. They're that arrogant. Now, they allow for the existence, as does, you know, Norbert Wiener, of limited anti-entropy. That they look at the evidence of life evolving from single-celled amoebas and very boring specimens in the fossil records, and things get more complex and more rich and abundant in time. You could see it in just the sedimentary rock formation as it becomes closer to the present. There's an obvious case of anti-entropy. Their law of heat death doesn't seem to be applying in this empirical data, but they say that's an anomalous, localized case of anti-entropy on this part of the Milky Way, and life is like living matter, biology is disobeying it, but in a limited way. And human beings really disobey it because we can really, really exceed the boundary conditions when we're being creative. But what they also say is there's a conservation of energy. There's a limited amount of energy in the universe that was all created at this imaginary time 3.7 billion years ago called the Big Bang. And thus, with this limited amount of energy, every time you have more babies, every baby takes more energy to sustain itself. That means the baby is parasitically sucking the energy from the entire universe, accelerating the rate, even on some low level, but it's accelerating the rate of entropy artificially towards a more, a sooner heat death than it would otherwise suffer from if you just lowered your population and regulated, and you would have a little bit longer. But ultimately, they still believe that the heat death function is the absolute nothingness that is pulling us teleologically into that future is the ultimate controller of everything else. And all that we can do to be truly strong philosophers, real men in that cosmology of nihilism, is to embrace the fact of the nothingness that is the dominant, that dominates the everythingness, and that there is no fundamental purpose, no metaphysics, no soul, no freedom, nothing that cannot be, because these are concepts that cannot be put into a computer or measured or smelled empirically, so they could not exist. They're anti-metaphysics in that sense, even though they have, ironically, their own metaphysics, right? This is they're imposing metaphysical views onto the universe, right? And views of good and bad. These are metaphysical concepts that they still hold to, but they deny intellectually because they're not consistent with themselves, because they're ultimately worshiping a god of absurdity, an evil god that is ultimately an absurd god that they see themselves in the image of, and that all they believe in is the right to power. My will to power gives me the right to control whatever. And if my blood and genetics were not the best, I would have been born into a poor class or poor family. But the fact that I'm born into a hereditarily mighty family with many possessions I've inherited is the scientific justification that they need to support their thesis that they are the master Ubermenschen governing the transhumanist chains of CRISPR technology and the Mustafa Mons of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World that are going to create the new test tube babies that will be trained to be from genetic birth the workers, the thinkers, the alpha pluses, the betas, and that's how they really believe that they can manage the universe as gods of the universe. Now, Aldous Huxley, who I cited from Brave New World, people say, oh, he was warning us. He was warning us of what would happen if we allowed imperialism or something to go without keeping it in check. No. As can be proven by anybody who reads his Brave New World Revisited, his lectures to Stanford University students in 1960, where he talks about the need to control human society. The masses have to be controlled by a master elite. He himself is a eugenicist. He's working closely with his brother, Julian Huxley, who's also the founder of UNESCO. He's the president of the British Eugenics Society, Julian Huxley. He's a leading cyberneticist. He is working with Prince Bernhard and Prince Philip, the Bernhard being the founder of the Bilderberger Group. He works closely with this creature to create a new movement of ecologism around the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, which they create in 1961. He had earlier created the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in 1947, the world's first modern ecology, eco-protection organization, which was the idea was to protect nature from human economic activity. So basically justify why India or Africa or other countries should not develop the resources, the hydroelectric dams, other things that they need to end poverty and thus end empire and war, because if you want to have constant war, you got to create poverty. So better to have people, living in scarcity so that they're more easy to be played against each other. Empires need to have divide to conquer. When they're building economic development projects, harnessing the electricity power, the energy power of rivers, using dams, flood controls to save lives, to create food abundance, that's a problem for empire, because then neighboring people start working together, discovering why they have more in common, why it's better to work together than to fight each other. and they start hoping in the future reasonably, and thus they're less inclined to become jihadists who want to just go and like, you know, blow themselves up for whatever cause.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
the creative force.
That's the creative force.
That's so they're trying to justify bionetics with cybernetics to keep control, and for at the moment, 21 centuries after the coming of Christ, they've tried almost everything to keep us at bay, and they've tried several times to cull the herd.
Yes.
Okay? Culling the herd is a very interesting concept, which our Portuguese audience should look into. Then maybe Gonçalo puts a simple explanation how shepherds cull the herd in order to maintain the ecosystem sustainable and the herd productive for the shepherd, of course. The herd serves the shepherd. Are you optimistic regarding next 10, 15 years? Do you think our population, which Gonçalo just told, is very receptive to all these extinction agendas? Are you optimistic regarding the population? What do you feel when you talk to people, when people approach you in the street? Yeah, I know you in Canada, you've been to Japan. Is there any conscience of this intense struggle going on?
Well, I think like you gentlemen, I you know, the looking at history, it doesn't take long to discover that most people don't know what's going on most of the time throughout most of history. It's very rare that I don't even think that humanity, I don't think, has come to the mature stage of its existence yet, whereby the normal is wise. So the normal is still quite mediocre. And under times when the oligarchy sinks its teeth, its metaphysical and political structures and teeth into its host, because it's like a parasite. You know, the oligarchy, humanity can act like a parasite, but it's really Freudian projection of the oligarchy's own dispositions that they want to project onto their victims, so that the victims don't feel like we can govern ourselves, which is why people become misanthropic. We start thinking that, oh, it would be so good if we got rid of nation states and just had overlords taking care of us. You know, a lot of people are unfortunately very susceptible to that, because they have only seen disgusting, shameful behavior in the world outside of them under the age of, you know, everything goes capitalism of the last 40, 50 years of consumerism, and also in their own world. They've been degenerated and debased, so that they've been told, you know, you have to abide by this lifestyle of utilizing a template of the Apollo Dionysus cultish lifestyle. You know, the dualism of be a worker 9 to 5 in a job you hate in the daytime, and then you'll be gratified on Friday nights or Saturday nights in the weekends to be a hedonistic beast. You know, doing drugs and having fun, having whatever you want hedonistically, just satisfy that. And they get people to vacillate in these extremes of Apollo and Dionysus in their own hearts, that they lose sight of their own better nature, the higher angels of their better selves. They forget how that works, and they feel like an animal, and an animal requires a zookeeper, and they start begging and hoping for a zookeeper to bring me food on my table, help me, you know, help end the wars, just whatever can be brought in to just give me some peace and stability, right? Most of human beings have been trapped under various forms of that type of degeneration, and the best change is...
Sorry,
go on.
Can I just go on board on your thought? Because I want to add this, like, that was exactly the point that I was trying to give as well. Like, I have this concept as well of conceiving like Western society in a way. Like, I wanted to introduce this kind of macro narratives, like the Spenglerian kind of like Western decay, seasons for this Western civilization. And because what I'm noticing conceptually is a kind of prosopagnosia, like in general, like people only recognize parts and don't recognize the whole, like in a way. So it's like a metaphorical aspect, like everyone is working towards its incentive, obviously, like they have all this kind of like low level ideological perception, like stoicism, in a very like commercial way, like, you know, so you have to like do these, like the hustle culture as well, this oscillating between the Dionysian, and having this idea that Dionysian is related to like the hedonistic approach as well, and your identity and validation as a person is it can be like with your like sexual conquest, or like your the way you live your life, if you have like material possessions, like all these kind of like already known things. But in a way, like that's what I was trying to the thought that I was trying to deliver is that we having these like incentives to develop a thing that we're not understanding what is being developed. Like it's an open conspiracy of like H.G. Wells kind of thing. Like everyone is compartmentalized in their own ideology in a way, developing a thing, but not understanding the whole that's being built. And we are all like they're all false dichotomies in a way, because we're serving the main goal, like this controlled opposition kind of thing. So that's what I wanted to add to your thoughts.
Yeah. No, Ed, you've just introduced something very important, which is understanding. There's something that has been said so many times, it kind of becomes just a boring truism, but it's more profound if you think about it than people realize. With understanding comes power, right?
Yeah.
But with that power comes responsibility. And I know Spider-Man or Uncle Ben said that, I know.
Yeah.
but think about it, it's true. If you try to have power to act, to do things, to express your will, but you skip the step of developing the hard work of understanding, then you're going to make a mess. You will always abuse and pervert whatever instrument you try to use, a chainsaw, a hammer, if you try to, whatever you're trying to act upon, if you're doing it with ignorance of the thing, or even worse, false knowledge, sophistry, right? The ignorance that wears the appearance of knowledge, that's even worse because it's harder to identify. Because if you think you know something you don't know, you're really not going to be able to have the freedom to evaluate why you're wrong and what the truth is. Whereas at least if you're ignorant, just simply ignorant, but don't believe that you know what you don't know, then at least you're free to make a discovery. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're a little bit honest. So all that to say, sophistry is a big problem. So you're going to make a mess. And the oligarchy, what they're doing is they're taking tools that were created by creative beings, the tools of electricity, you know, computing technology, all of the things that allow us to have the type of liberty that we have currently to speak, utilizing satellites, you know, moving around the earth, translating information, sound and audio through these cameras at the speed of light, you know, in Japan and Portugal and Canada. You know, this is an incredible thing, you know. And if you look at the origins of the ideas that made all of this possible, the driving force of a Gottfried Leibniz, of a Johannes Kepler, of a Benjamin Franklin, of a Max Planck, who discovered the quantized nature of electricity, or matter per se, even more deeply, right? Or Kurt Gödel and Planck and Madame Curie, like these are people who had a integrated. You read their writings, and their personal thoughts, which very few people do, right? We've been told that all we need to do is go to Wikipedia or read some Cambridge authority from the Encyclopedia Britannica to tell us how to think about Max Planck or Kepler or Benjamin Franklin. Why go to their books, right? Why read their original writings? That's so hard. Other smarter people have done it for us anyway. We could get Cliff's notes. Now, the fact is, that's bullshit. If you read their writings, you start discovering that they're all, they've all to varying degrees matured their will and duty, their desires, their passions, and their sense of conscience, of duty in a very mature, integrated fashion. So for most people who are trapped in oligarchical systems, which I believe even the oligarchy itself, we're not integrated. We're conditioned and groomed to be at war with ourselves. Our hearts and our minds have very little coherence. And that's how the oligarchy likes it. And the cultural standards that are promoted by oligarchical forms of society are always going to cause a divergence, a breakaway of science and arts, where we'll be told in varying ways that any type of art that uses intention or reason behind it, whether in music or painting or sculpture, it's polluted. It's not pure art, because pure art, we are told, is pure feelings, random, raw emotion detached from thought. And science should be devoid of feelings, because feelings are pollution to truth, because truth is just this objective, non-subjective, rules of the universe. That's all truth is. And this dichotomy is so sick and unhealthy, because Einstein was a violinist. He was a classically trained violinist, as was Max Planck. He was a classically trained pianist. Madame Curie was an artist. Her artwork is fantastic. Kepler is a musician. That's how Kepler is discovering the harmonic arrangement of the planetary motions.
Yeah, even since Pythagoras, you have like a strong connection to music as well. Like like the creative endeavor is always interrelated with a scientific one. But I want to make you just this one more question, Matthew. So
wait.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to wrap it up into the question of the culture. I think ultimately, whether or not technologies are going to be used to enslave and hurt us, or liberate us and make us better, is going to be, it's more culturally determinant than it is the technology itself. The technology, as far as I see it, anything created by human beings is somewhat neutral of a tool. Even the atom applied in a technological form can desalinate water, can be used for terraforming, all sorts of good things with the atomic power. But you could build it, if you have an imperial society, you might want to just build bombs to kill each other instead, right? And use it for destruction. So it's like that, I think, for the case also of machine learning. The way I look at even like digital, like the fight over like the new economic structure that will replace the current dying architecture, that is globalization was created to be demolished, to self-implode. That's what was created in the early 70s, was a system that was designed to blow and bring in a crisis of shock therapy that could then force people to accept standards of living and being that were so unnatural, but we would be so desperate that we would accept it. That was what was thought of by Prince Bernhard, all of the eugenicists, when they created the Bilderberger Group, when they created, the Trilateral Commission, the Davos groups, all of these things back in the 70s. That was always the idea. So, but now the thing is, I think you've got a battle over what is the fourth industrial revolution going to be? Yeah. Will the tools that are, 3D printing, machine learning, quantum computing, are these intrinsically evil? Even digital banking, frankly, the way I see it is even the whole fight around like digital banking. It's a question of morality, because if you have a society which is animated by the idea that human beings are sacred and that we are the cause of what allows us to leap outside of the limits to growth, and we have to leap outside the limits to growth by making new discoveries. And if that's your value structure, then you could have a banking system based on plastic, on digital currency, whatever. Yeah, but you're not going to value contracting people and killing off people to satisfy some mathematical model of stasis. Whereas if you've got a death cult that worships stasis and entropy, then yeah, they will use all of those same things that I mentioned, computer learning and 3D printing and digital banking to force the modification of behavior according to the value system of the death cult, to kill, or to basically, do what they want us to do and slaughter ourselves.
But yeah, that's the thing, Matthew. For example, what you just said, like globalization was like a cocoon for self-implosion, to like a problem to find a solution. And if you go to, like, for example, the Spengler terminology, you have also that idea of like of the winter, and then Caesarism comes, and like someone will save, like, for example, like the civilization in decay or something like that, and it's the end in those type. So I want to ask you, what do you think about this kind of macro narratives, even like the perception of dialectic of Hegel, that we're like trying to reach freedom, the idea of like seasons, like for different civilization standpoints, the fact that self-induced kind of problems and situations solutions like globalization in a way to present this kind of like solution that is being worked and developed by ourselves for it, so it will be easy. Like I see it for my friends. My friends are like, they love these kind of like technological endeavors. ChatGPT is like a savior for them all, obviously. And I'm not saying it's not like an inconvenient tool, because as you said, I also think it stands on a moral discussion as well. But still, they can be used, like it depends of the top bottom kind of operation. And in the terminology, like we are like in a moral decay. That's like a thing. Like, so how can we like use these type of tools if our belief systems and our core morals are completely being corrupted, not only by the top bottom relation, but even like from bottom to the top, like we're projecting as well.
Yeah, no, you're totally, it's a great question. And you know, like there's no easy answer except to say that the oligarchy will always promote models explaining human behavior and deep history and technology. You know, they'll have theories of technology that they'll promote, which destroy the concept of free will by making it seem as though technology is a force unto itself that moves kind of like a demonic force or a demonic spirit, independent of human voluntary choice, thought, action, political agendas. They just remove all of that and pretend it's this sociological sort of Darwinian force, which has a life of its own, and that's going to hit a singularity and then become self-aware and replace us. You know, unless we integrate with machines and get neural links and then become relevant again, like Elon Musk proposes. So that's the transhumanist sort of new eugenics. The thing is, it's true that every time, I remember back in the 90s, before I had a cell phone, I remembered about 25, 30 phone numbers in my mind, right? Now I can barely remember 4 phone numbers. Is that a good thing? No, it's a bad thing. I obviously, you know, it's useful to have this thing as to hold my memories. And before the written word, you know, people would, before the written word became normalized, it was normal. Yeah, oral tradition would pass on for generations. The Vedas, the Homeric stories in the form of song, right? So there was a powerful memory function, which was crippled a bit, you could say, by the invention of the written word. Did it have to be? Well, if you're a Marshall McLuhan, or if you're a Yuval Harari or a transhumanist, you would say, or Ray Kurzweil, you would say, yes, it had to happen because technology increases in, you know, they'll have this inverse relationship that without technology, human beings were wonderful. We had freedom, great memory power, nature was perfect. Yeah, Rousseau, right? Noble savages with great memory. And then our freedom diminished as technology increased and industry increased. And as that freedom decreased in that same proportion, destruction to nature, which was like nothing when we were ignorant, living with, you know, the monkeys, you know, as early on, before the knowledge of fire, we had we weren't destructive to nature. Nature was pure and perfect. And then as technology increases and industry increases, the destruction of nature also increases in tandem, right? So they have this formula that they've worked out, that they're committed to, that denies human voluntary decisions, thought, action, free will. So the challenge is always that technology is good to the degree, conditional. It's conditionally good to the degree that our cultural values are the evolution of the arts, the aesthetical sphere that's invisible but real, the spiritual sphere of existence that is culture, right? The improvement of science, the true science, not the shit science, but the real science, and the qualitative improvement in music and the arts have to increase at least the same pace, but ideally at a faster pace than the flow of the evolution of technology and industry. If they're detached, and your culture decays and degenerates to become mediocre, debauched, and corrupt, then your technology is going to serve the interests always of the enslaver class. So the question is, how can I cultivate my memory, even though I'm using cell phones and I'm using modern technology? How do I not destroy my memory powers, right? How the radio, you know, before the days of the radio and recordings of music in the 19th century, people would only experience a Mozart symphony, maybe if they were lucky, once, you know? And so it was a more sacred experience where they were much more present in every moment, because they would have to live it in their memories afterwards. They knew that they couldn't go and put a CD on or listen to YouTube anytime they wanted, right? So it was a more sacred experience. So can we refine can we be present with qualitative love of culture? Can we read poetry? Can we read Homer? Can we read Plato's dialogues or Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound? And really immerse ourselves in it. I'm actually
reading Homer right now, so it's just
cool. Fun. So that's the thing, right? Can we do that? At this point, like I said, you see traces of infighting within the oligarchy's upper management. Similar, because I've done a lot of research on history before and during World War II, as far as looking at the battles within the British Empire and within the upper establishment of the Anglo-American elite. There were fights over whether or not to continue with their well-prepared plans to go along with a Nazi-driven global reorganization under the control or management of, or partnership of, a City of London, Wall Street banking elite. And if you look at it, I mean, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller family, Standard Oil, the DuPonts, the Morgan Trust, were all backing the growth of fascism well before World War II and during World War II. And the City of London, big time, right? So, but you had a fight within different factions when it became clear that Hitler no longer wanted to be the junior partner of this new world order, but rather wanted to be the senior partner with the British Anglo-Saxon brothers co-managing as partners the new world order. And some, like the Nazi king, Edward the Eighth, was perfectly happy. He was actually in Portugal, right? He was perfectly happy, saying, "I'm okay with that. I'm okay being your Nazi king as your junior partner, managing India and a big chunk of Africa, and we'll do that." And many American elites, like Prescott Bush, the granddaddy of George Bush Jr., was also okay with that. You know, he was caught red-handed in Congress in a congressional hearing, inquiry, having funded the Nazi war machine via a sort of fascist secondary banking front group. But he was found, he knew it the whole time, and he was stripped of all of his assets and his title, and Union Banking Corporation that he worked for was also stripped down by the U.S. government at the time, when it was still managed by some nationalists who didn't want to sacrifice their own people. So you had an inner fight, a battle, and then because the Churchill groups of the British Empire were like, no, it's too much of a sacrifice to make. Let's abort this plan. It's getting out of hand. The Nazis, we don't want to be second junior partner in this. We don't accept that. And so they had to abort their machine. But there was a big fight for a couple of years in Britain. So I'm sort of seeing traces of a similar sort of infighting over the machine that was put into motion around getting the whole collective West to support the Ukrainian cause, with the idea that Russia would be destroyed by now, economically at least. That didn't happen. They've put so much effort into the propaganda matrix to polarize the zeitgeist around this garbage, which isn't working. We're doing more damage to ourselves at a faster rate. And Eurasia, Russia, China are actually growing quite fast, while we are self-mutilating, making it very difficult to carry out a sabotage, a real economic or military war with Eurasia. Like, we can't do it if we destroy ourselves. So you have now Jeffrey Sachs, again, a minion of the empire. I don't believe for 1 second that this guy is an authentic person, but he's smart, he's sophisticated, and he is deployed to try to be one of several voices to try to turn the ship. And there's so much momentum that they put, it's really difficult to turn this giant ship into a new direction and abort the Ukrainian project. Elon Musk,
Jeffrey Sachs is one of the interfaces and controllers of the Vatican, correct?
He interfaces with them closely. He works closely in my research with very high level powers within the Jesuit structure, and he is a cyberneticist. He's a high level cyberneticist from the London Fabian Society, the London School of Economics. He's very sophisticated. He oversaw the destruction of Russia in the 90s while representing the IMF. and overseeing the growth of a new cybernetics management of a deep state inside of Russia in the 90s, which is still a problem Russia is currently facing. There's a battle in Russia that's caused by the thing that the monster that Sachs was deployed to create with, you know, George Soros, Strobe Talbot, a Rhodes Scholar who worked with Bill Clinton, Al Gore.
Yeah.
So all that, will I attack what he's saying right now? No, because what he is saying is eminently reasonable, and it's a sign of, just like Elon Musk's remarks around going to war with China as stupid. That's true. These are signs of a saner faction of within the elite that recognizes that their true self-interest requires that they eat some humble pie, self-examine, try to not repent. They don't repent. They're not capable of that, but live to fight another day, right? Subvert from within, maybe win the trust of China, win the trust of Russia, and slowly cozy up once again and infiltrate like a poison from within. And maybe down the line, they could do it again with more sophistication. That's the current agenda I identify.
So you
let's
would
hope
consider...
we have...
Sorry, just one short remark. So you consider like the... I read a paper as well, as you were saying that BRICS, how they changed the game, kind of like the big geopolitical scenario. You would consider like Russia, China, and the Eurasia bloc a kind of a resistance to a decentralized techno dystopia dream that is being...
Yeah, I wrote a book called Open versus Closed Systems Collide, and I'm always encouraging people to entertain thinking about evaluating global systems both throughout history, but also especially now in the present, as being a clash between these Zeusian closed systems of entropy versus open systems that seek to place value on leaping beyond the limits to growth. That's right. You might have money, you might use similar words in either system, but the underlying purpose, design, principle, the idea of humanity, the idea of government, it's qualitatively different universes that use similar words that confuse people, because in Eurasia, they still use words like Fourth Industrial Revolution. They use words like sustainability. But in China, if you look at the practical, this is what people rarely do, and I try to encourage them to be more rigorous, is to look at, well, what is the practical expression of the ideas of sustainability applied by India or China versus the transatlantic death cult? Yeah. Because their idea of sustainability is nuclear power, third, fourth generation nuclear power, fusion power, investments into all branches. Coal and oil, they're still burning massively because they see carbon dioxide as sustainable because it's plant food. So it's not a bad thing to be green in that way, because you want to make more, you want to green deserts. You want to desalinate water to make deserts blossom. You want to train people to become scientists and engineers who are qualified to do these things and make better decisions. In the West, we've destroyed all of our practical civil engineers who built our society in the 50s and 60s. They're like 80, 90 are dead. And the new breeds of engineers are people trained by eco-green engineering using computer models with no knowledge of the real world. They can't build shit. And, like we're really self-immolating. So I think that's the way I try to say, like, look, Eurasia all of the evidence is that they're open system. Whereas we are trapped in a closed system paradigm. It's very different.
They're preparing for population growth. We are preparing for population decline.
Exactly.
That's our in brackets death wish.
Perfect way of putting it. Yeah.
That's Zeus. Okay. So we better wrap it up now. It was a very enjoyable conversation, I believe. Matt, thank you very much. You were fantastic. Gonçalo, do you want to say something else?
Well, I would, if it was up to me, I would keep going like for 3 or 4 more hours, because now I think I'm getting started. So yeah.
No, you guys are really fun. You guys have wonderful, insightful contributions and great questions, and I we should do this again. I would actually be open to let's schedule another three-way conversation.
That would be perfect. Even because sometimes I feel like that my English is not getting like the proper translation for my thought. I always get this thinking, so that's the reason why I avoided to make questions and give you more like concept words in a way, like for you to develop the thought, because I still don't think my English is accurate to this kind of level of conversation. So I was like a little bit insecure. But now I had like some more topics that I wanted to introduce. So if you're up to it, that would be perfect, because I would love to just like be a little bit better prepared, so I can like have like I could read like some questions as well, you know, like prepare them previously.
Anytime. No, honestly, this is fun, and I thought your questions, your compositions were wonderful. It was really great. But yeah, let's do it again for sure.